All right, good evening, everybody. We're going to get rolling here in just a second. Got an awesome lineup of whiskeys tonight, an epic range of both Hedonism and the Extinct Blends Quartet. If you didn't get the tasting order, I put that in the chat in the waiting room. I'll put it in the main one here. You probably have it um, from the email, but there you go. Fire that on to Facebook as well. Exciting news as of today. Harmony has been hard at work with the assistance of some of her coworkers, and we've finally got the This Is Not an Advent Calendar full Monty kits built. I think they're all ready to go. Excited about that. Excited to have those completed, so they are ready for pickup. And yeah, anything you can do to collect yours at the earliest opportunity would be appreciated, because post sale and post construction of those tasting kits, we are a little bit pressed for space. And there are still a few available for sale. If you're interested, we are also selling a small number of individual kits, and there's actually been people interested in just one or two kits. And I think if you haven't seen it yet, I'm going to throw this up on screen because we're pretty proud of it. Um, this is what the final artwork looks like for that. So uh, yeah, individual kits, and if you assemble them all, you get a nice little picture there. This is not an advent calendar. It's a series of tastings. So those are up there on the website. They're on our tasting page, as are the rest of our November, December events. November is nearly done, but there are a few things coming up, including if you're in Calgary tomorrow, no, Thursday night. It's only Tuesday. There are a handful of tickets left for our Fall Single Malt Festival, and the following week for our 1990s Go Big or Go Home whiskey tasting, which has got a bunch of cool things in it. And then the following week, we've got some in-store tastings, but they're all sold out, so I won't bore you with that. But for tonight's tasting, we've got my friend James Bornn has joined us. One of the biggest Compass Box fans in Canada. I'd like to say along with myself, but I have to admit, James knows even more than I do by virtue of the fact that he has to sell it and explain it to far more people than I ever do. James, this is a fun lineup. It took some time to pull this together, literally,
Yeah, I'm assuming that the ratio of skeptics is a little bit lower in this group tonight, which is a relief.
for sure. Yeah, I think we're for the most part preaching to the choir, the converted. Um, Maybe not so much on the hedonism. I mean, that might be the interesting ones. We'll see how many people buy into the grain whiskey, but the traditional blends, which is the back end of the tasting,
Yeah.
I expect. Then this tasting sold out pretty quickly too. So I think we're in good shape in terms of our audience for this one tonight.
Yeah, the hedonism, that's a fair point. I usually think that there's two big obstacles. Either you're new to Compass Box and you're getting used to the idea of what like premium blended scotch even is,
Mhm.
or you're in and you kind of come to the realization that you actually don't love all of them, and that can be tough. Because
Mhm.
usually, you know how that goes. It's like if you fanboy over a brand in whiskey, it's usually the whole. And Compass Box isn't really like that at all.
Well, I
It's
mean,
too varied.
and they can't always be to your taste either. I mean, I like to think I'm a reasonable judge of things that are good, but then there's things that I like. There's things that I get really excited about. And
Mhm.
I don't think I've had too many releases over the years where I was like, wow, I don't like that with Compass Box. Um, I mean, there's a few things like there was that one, was it the Calvados marriage, the one,
Yeah,
the hybrid? That was not one of my favorites, but that's probably somewhat predictable.
yeah, yeah. I love that one. So there you go.
Yeah, they're not for everyone.
Yeah,
Uh, and I think it's kind of cool that we're starting off with hedonism, because in some ways, hedonism is where this all began in the first place.
totally.
Um,
So yeah, of course, John Glazer, the founder, came from the wine business. He was American. I believe he was born in Minnesota.
mhm.
Ended up working for Diageo and transferred to their UK department, where he ended up working in the marketing department for Johnny Walker. So what that allowed him to do, and I think like really the hedonism story kind of stems from his visits into the tasting lab, where he basically had like a back door to the process with Jim Beveridge, who was the master blender at the time. And I think like the blended grain stuff and those old grain whiskeys that he discovered, he was not familiar with them,
Mhm.
and he became kind of obsessed with it, I think.
Yeah.
So to the point where when he did finally, where he was told he couldn't expand the Johnny Walker portfolio and instead went out on his own,
Mhm.
that was the first thing he did. He blended hedonism in his kitchen with two ingredients.
Well, and he would have had access to some pretty crazy stuff back then too, because the industry was at the very, very start of the rebuilding process. Like it had gone through a terrible crash in the early 80s. It limped through the late 80s and early 90s. And it was around that time, around the turn of the millennium, that it was only just starting to get back up on its feet again. And at that time, I mean, you would have been able to get grains from the 50s and 60s with no problem. Like there was lots of that stock available, and no one was really interested in it. The blends market had been declining for years. The trajectory on that wasn't improving, and all of a sudden, everyone's interested in Scotch again, but they're interested in single malts.
Yeah.
And I mean, I remember you could get 40-year-plus-year-old grain whiskeys for $140 when I started at the time. There you could get 40, almost 50-year-old grains for under $200. Uh,
Now, did you have customers then that were obsessed specifically with grain whiskey and were searching them out? Or was it
no,
more of just like a little spice on the side?
yeah, and it was more like, wow, that's cool. 50 years old. Like, I got to spend, well, and maybe that was high. Maybe they were $120 because this is also at the tail end of the period where you could get Gordon MacPhail 50-year-old Glen Grant for 225 bucks. Like,
Yeah.
it was a crazy, crazy period. And uh, that was hard to sell because people didn't know what Glen Grant was. Like, and it, you know, had these weird labels that were sort of hard to read, but were like really old school. So yeah, it was an interesting time. But what's fascinating about it, and with John's story and the story of the birth of Compass Box, is there's so many different ways he could have gone. And the fact that it was this idea to blend just grain whiskeys, which wasn't even a thing. Like there was no such thing as grain whiskey or blended grain whiskey at the time. There was the odd single grains, and that was it. And he created a whole new category in the starting of his company. So James, hedonism, it's been a staple now for 20 odd years in Canada. Um, it's
Yeah, it's working with hedonism, lots of memorable moments, I think, because there still to this day, I don't think really is another product like hedonism out there. It's bottled at 43%, but of course that's not chill filtered because the amount of oils is low
Mhm.
in grain whiskey. In fact, I'm assuming the spirit itself probably has almost no oils.
Yeah. And this is one that's sadly all but gone. We have less than 3 bottles in store. I don't know exactly how many. And James,
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's now sold out. Like this is not something we can
Yeah,
get.
you can download the a lot of the recipes from previous batches on the Compass Box website. There is kind of a generic recipe that I think they somewhat have stuck to over the years. Usually there is some sort of grain in that 25 to 27 year range that brings like darker flavors. And then there's often a 20 to 21-year-old grain. And then usually there's something in kind of the 16 to 18-year-old range. And there's kind of those three rough components that bring like slightly different parts of the spectrum.
Mhm.
They're always American oak matured, but there's been some special releases. Obviously, we'll get to that have featured other types of casks, but the regular hedonism has always been 100% American oak.
I mean, that's a very drinkable, like
Yeah,
quite spicy whiskey too. I really love the profile on that. It's silky, it's honeyed, but there's lots of character there. I mean, effectively, this is a whiskey that essentially uh, became a victim of its own success, and that they could
hmm,
not continue to produce this and sell it at the price they were selling it for because the availability of those older grains has become harder in recent years. It's
yeah,
been much harder to source them, but this is still great value, great bang for buck. Nice mouthfeel, as you said. It's non-chill filtered, even though it's 43%.
Yep. I've witnessed in tastings because you can imagine like every Compass Box tasting I do, it's you start with hedonism. It's an easy first step, right? Because
Hmm.
it tells the story. A lot of people have never tried anything like it before, so it's kind of a gateway to open people's heads of how, how the whole structure of the laws and the different types of Scotch whiskey that they've, never been presented with.
Hmm.
Um, so I've seen people have like these like Paul on the road to Damascus moments with this whiskey where like, someone puts up their hand, they're like, "Oh, I came here with a friend. I've never liked whiskey before." Like that's happened to me like 20 or 30 times over the years with hedonism, where people put up their hand, they're like, "This is the first whiskey that I've truly loved," which is kind of cool. I would say
Yeah.
personally, my how I would typically consume hedonism is because of the strength and the character of it. Sometimes when you have those single cask American oak aged whiskeys that are kind of like 15 to 25 years old, and they kind of, maybe you want, instead of adding water, I might actually add a splash of this.
Let's see. Is it Sprite? I, funny story while you're trying to uh I don't know if you're looking to pull something up there, but I did used to have this guy who would come to our whiskey festivals, and he'd always have something hidden in his jacket, like it would be a blazer, and he would pour it out, and then he would add a little bit of it to the whiskey. And one day I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Like, you can't be adding stuff. This is you know, do you have liquor in your jacket? And he's like, no, it was a bottle of Sprite. This guy would
Okay,
come,
I get the joke now.
and he would come and take like, I don't know, we had two, three, $400 bottles of scotch in some of these tastings, and he'd be adding Sprite to it because he believed it opened them up and brought out the
Oh
flavor.
my gosh.
Anyway,
Well, I mean, I know you and I both love those like kind of old, tired cask American oak hogshead whiskeys, and they can be so beautiful and delicate. But I think you also know they can be kind of lifeless and dull
yeah,
sometimes. And that's where hedonism is like wonderful as like a little touch can go a long ways.
just do your own blending.
Yeah.
Well, I used to be very critical of anyone who would chill their whiskey or add ice to it. And interestingly, the moment when I stopped that was actually a conversation I had with John Glazer. And I think we were out for dinner one night in London. He's like, what do you think? What are your thoughts on adding ice? And I'm like, well, I don't think it does most whiskeys good, from a purely technical standpoint, which is still correct. Um, but I said I used to joke, like I had this joke about the mountains turning blue and Coors Light, and that it's a terrible beer, especially if it warms up. And he's like, "Yeah, you're not wrong." He said, but for him, his favorite like way to drink hedonism was on a hot day on a patio in
Straight
a
out of the
giant
freezer.
Chardonnay glass with a single big block ice cube in it. And
Interesting.
if the guy who made that, and a guy who's got an incredible palate for
Yeah.
whiskey and wine, is cool with that. I mean, so just tasting this now, that's what it makes me think of. Like, and I have done this since hot day, I don't want a single malt or something sherry or peaty or heavy, but like something like hedonism, a grain
Yeah.
whiskey and an ice cube, and it's basically just a cocktail.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Remember James Saxon talking about one of the quirks of working with John was that he would take batches for hedonism before they locked them in and put them in the freezer and then
Mhm.
retaste them. So,
Well, maybe he wanted to see if it was going to be a good summer or not.
right.
Well, I mean, that's a lovely starting point. It's not insanely complex, but it's not without complexity either. There's some nice white fruits there, jujubes, some nice creamy tones, honey, maybe a bit of baklava. Um, yeah, it's easy drinking, and
Yeah,
kind of disappointing that we won't have it moving forward.
totally. Yeah, I think the other kind of hallmark of hedonism is they tend to avoid excessive amounts of kind of like rum character or like that plasticky character,
Mhm.
which we don't all love.
Well, and sometimes can't be avoided with grain whiskeys. I mean, that I guess is the downside. We haven't really gone into this about like why grain and why this is kind of an interesting category, but really the industry for the longest time saw it as filler. It was a way to take malt whiskeys that were either too flavorful or too valuable in blends and to use them in smaller quantities, and you would build those flavors on top of the grain whiskey, which was the body. I used to, and this is probably too simplistic and not charitable enough. I used to call grain whiskey the unintentionally good whiskey. And it wasn't that it can't be great, but it was that it was never made to be excellent. It was
Yeah.
just made to be nondescript.
Yeah, the
And
bar has to be in a different place
yeah,
when you judge it.
but after a time, it oxidizes the same way that single malts do. You can get that esterification process. You can pick up characteristics from the wood,
Yeah.
and there can be something cool there. Uh, and John had a very interesting approach to grains in his blends. They weren't filler for him. They were an accent. They added something different. Maybe it was a silky tone or a creamy tone. Um, but those grain whiskeys, if anyone's ever had Hague Club, which is a good example of like not great grain whiskey, it's young, it's raw, and it's like drinking some kind of solvent cleaner
Yeah.
because a lot of those
Yeah,
grain
it tastes like bad
whiskeys,
vodka.
yeah, terrible vodka, very flavorful vodka,
Yeah.
um, and not in a
Yeah.
cave.
Yeah, shall we move on? And
We shall
yeah.
pop it up on the screen here. So James, this one kind of came and gone, and it's gone.
Yeah.
Um, will we
Unless you
see
live
it?
in BC where it's just releasing in the next 2 weeks.
Of course. You should have just
Sorry.
let us take it all, James.
I know.
Simplify things.
Yeah. Yeah, well then you have to thumb wrestle Adam Bradshaw.
That's fair. Uh, so new release of Hedonism, ball. And is this the idea? We're gonna have a limited release annually of Hedonism?
Yeah, that's correct. For those that troll the internet forums, the 2025 edition has been leaked. But yeah, essentially what happened was they realized that they didn't have the stock anymore or access to additional stock on the secondary market to consistently produce the hedonism recipe anymore. So the idea was, they knew they had a lot of great grain whiskey in their own stock. A lot of people don't know this, but like Compass Box, I think their stock of whiskey is bigger than Gordon MacPhail's. So they're in good shape there. Um, but yeah, basically just instead to just do a single special release every year of it. And this first one, the idea was to just kind of almost make like a slightly older and better version of regular hedonism. It's like hedonism plus, if you will. Don't do anything kind of divergent.
I like that idea of Hedonism Plus.
Yeah.
In fact, that should be
And yeah, they're commissioning um artists for each new one. So this was a British artist, her name's Stephanie Yu. You could buy prints of this work, by the way, on their website. I don't know if it's still up.
yeah.
And yeah, they commissioned an Argentinian artist for next year's. This one is 43%. Next year's actually is 46. So you can tell they are doing some experimenting and
Mhm.
there's some creative things happening for sure.
The um, the nose on this I find is a little more shy,
Yeah.
right off the hop. The palate seems to have it's a bit creamier and has a bit more decadence to it, and at least at the start, maybe not quite as much spice.
Yeah, I always get that kind of like coconut cream kind of character out of hedonism, and it's a little bit thicker. The kind of that Ross beer character, which for sure hedonism does still have a little bit of that. It's definitely less in the
Mhm.
2024.
Mhm. The fruit tones to me are trending more towards like citrus, like lemon and lime, like some
Yeah,
nice bright citrus tones. Even maybe a little bit of like an agave nectar note too.
yeah. Andrew, should I share the recipe cards just in case there's someone that's never seen one?
Hmm.
Yeah, I guess I
Let's do
can
it.
technically share this here.
We have the technology.
Yeah, right. Okay, so this is the wheel. Um, so yeah, a lot of people that have followed Compass Box long term may recall that Compass Box has gotten in a lot of hot water over the years because legally you can't actually name specific ingredients in your whiskeys publicly.
Well, you
And
can't name
that
the age. I think you can name the ingredients, can't you?
you can't be specific. You can't have the distillery and age
Okay.
in the same information. So, like, I think that, the genesis of that law was to protect the consumer and,
Hmm.
to make sure there wasn't like, but yeah, in hindsight now, I mean, it just seems like it's protecting probably the suppliers more, I would say.
Yeah, and it's preventing companies that want to be more transparent from being fully transparent.
Yep. So, anyways, this is their workaround that they haven't been buzzed on. I mean, they've been doing this now for almost 10 years. And you can imagine what those tree rings represent.
Yeah.
That is, yeah, essentially the age. Now, you will hurt your brain if you like get close to the screen and try to count the rings.
Mhm.
But yeah, I believe the Cameron Bridge, which is like the that and the Gervin are kind of these two big components are 23 and 28. So like the core idea is the same here as earlier recipes, but it's just the whiskey's just a little bit older.
Mhm. And James, we can both say that we've counted tree rings on many occasions, trying
Oh
to
yeah, I mean
determine the age of components.
every time there's a new addition, it's like yeah. I'll share this as well. This is the 2025 artwork
Oh,
for
cool.
those that are into that sort of thing. Yeah. Not a lot of hints about what they did differently,
Hmm.
but yeah.
Did that,
Anyways.
we just saw the, I didn't see the new artwork. I just saw the tree rings. I didn't know if
Okay.
you actually got
Interesting.
that
I'll
artwork.
try one more time. I'll try sharing that one specifically.
I think that's a feature
See
that
that?
prevents you from switching pages while you're sharing things in case you're like me and have ADD and start looking at something else while you're still
Yeah,
sharing something.
sure.
But that's cool. It's got a flamenco air to it,
Yeah.
or samba or salsa, whatever the hell they do down in Buenos
Yeah.
Aires.
So so yeah, I can't confirm if Jeff is also collecting the artwork from all the Hedonism releases, but the price actually the prints was pretty fair. I think it was under $1,000. So I don't know.
Yeah.
If that's your thing.
Well, I just look at it this way. The more of that you have, the less room you have on your walls for bottles. So you gotta pick and choose your battles there.
Put them on the ceiling.
That's right. Yeah,
Okay.
you know what's funny? It's good. I like it. I'm not sure I like it that much more than the original. In fact, I'm might like that spice from the original more.
Yeah. Well, that
Anyway.
would be the easier critique of Hedonism 2024 is there's nothing kind of earth-shattering about it, which some of the other Hedonism special releases had, especially when we get to the Muse, you'll see like these like obvious divergent characteristics.
Mhm.
But this doesn't really.
Yeah. Well, speaking of other releases, shall we move on to Felicitas?
Yes.
So pull that up. Where is it here? And I'm relying on all these being in our archive, but some of these were balloted releases. Yeah, I don't even have the, oh no, I do. It's just not
Yeah,
in
they
the
didn't
names.
advertise it heavily, but essentially this was designed to celebrate their 20th anniversary and thus the 20th anniversary of hedonism.
Mhm. Now, that is that's a bottle in a box.
Yeah. Yeah, safe to say that some of the best artwork has come out through the hedonism releases.
Mhm. So what have we got here? We've got again another limited release. As you said, 20th anniversary. Felicitas is a reflection of the happy state in which Compass Box finds themselves, celebrating that milestone way back when, and blended with North British whiskey distilled in the 1990s and Port Dundas from 2001 at 53%.
Yep.
I don't know if you've got anything more earth-shattering than that, James.
No, I mean I could show
Oh
the
yeah,
yeah, okay.
let's put it up.
Yeah. So yeah, the kind of idea here was to have, again, they're celebrating their 20th anniversary. They wanted whiskey from three different decades. So yeah, there's whiskey from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, I believe. But yeah, if you follow along, one of the things you can do if you're a Compass Box hardcore type is you start to recognize some of these parcels show up in multiple releases, and this
Mhm,
Strathclyde parcel that's in here has shown up in many Compass Box releases. In fact, I think they may have used the last of it in one of the Extinct Blends quartets, but maybe we'll find out later.
mhm. The this like the orange citrus burst on the nose on that is quite intense.
Yeah, it's much more forward aromatically.
Hmm. You know, the nose is nice, but I mean, I think maybe this is one of the challenges with grain whiskey is that it's not as aromatic on the nose as a lot of
Mm,
malt whiskeys are because it's not it's more pure.
yeah,
It doesn't have all those impurities that are created using less efficient pot stills. The palate though is yeah, lots of citrus, lots of spice, really big on the orange for me. 53%. That extra ABV really kind of adding a warmth to those spicy tones too.
yeah. Yeah, you almost get a hint of like that tropical kind of almost passion fruity character, which
Hmm.
obviously is much more common in whiskey of this age from malt distilleries, but it kind of just barely peeks its head out here.
Yeah, like a little bit. The nose is starting to settle a bit. And yeah, you're getting like this sort of five alive tropical fruit mix.
Yeah, it reminds me of a grain whiskey that Boutique put out. You remember that 45-year-old
Mm.
blended grain that they did? And it had that kind of more that malt kind of tropical fruit flavor, and you get a little bit of that here for sure.
Was that one of their 10th anniversary bottles?
I think so.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That's pretty tasty.
Yeah. Yeah. One, my critique of Felicitas would be that it is a little hot
Hmm.
at even, I mean, it's 53%, but
I think though, for those of us who are used to drinking cask strength whiskey,
yeah, it's exactly.
but it's not sharp.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah,
No.
it's a little higher ABV, but uh
Yeah, it doesn't burn.
it's not punishing.
No.
I'm just looking. I'm gonna have to find a photo of Hedonism Muse because it's two websites ago almost for us, and
I
so I
can
don't
do it
have
for
anything
you
there.
here too.
Yeah, if you've got it, that'd be great. This was a
Yes.
pricier release. So this is the next one coming up. I don't mean to
Yeah.
rush people through Felicitas, but
Yeah, we
um,
should spend more time on the Extinct Blends Quartet at the end of the day.
mhm,
So here you go. Yeah, you kind of don't get the sense fully here, but it was fully reflective.
mhm. Now, James, would this have been around the time that you started working with Compass Box, or?
Good question. I started in 2012, which was right when like the General was just being released in stores when I started.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay, so
And I did not buy one because I thought it was expensive.
oh my God.
Yeah.
I
So
I'm
we'll put that right up there where when I canceled my Springbank membership because I thought I would just easily be able to get back in one day.
which also cost nothing to
I know.
maintain other than the emails.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, this was
Yeah, I should show
2018.
the ingredients here because it is pretty fascinating to see. Like, I think this was John's chance to just kind of go buck wild with hedonism and with some of the really crazy parcels he'd assembled over the years. So you can kind of see here there's this 29-year-old Invergordon, a pretty big chunk of 43-year-old Strathclyde, some 33-year-old unknown blended grain, which almost certainly came from Gordon MacPhail.
Hmm.
Yeah, you may know this, Andrew, but Gordon MacPhail has a crazy archive of old grain whiskeys that they have not released since David King came on board.
Yeah, well, I remember just before David King joined, and just before, like maybe a year or two before, your company took over representation, we
Hmm.
did get a handful of grain releases, which were the first we had ever seen from Gordon MacPhail.
Yeah, I think their concern has always been that because some of the grain whiskeys are so old, it gets confusing in terms of where to put them in the lineup.
Hmm.
And, like, should they be private collection bottles? Should they be connoisseur's choice upper? Like,
Hmm.
it's right.
I think
Like,
it should just be
yeah, that might make
connoisseur's
sense for
choice,
us, but
period.
it's tough to kind of standardize that process. And I think that's what's caused them to just hold on to them. I love that they're just like they'll just wait.
Yeah, it's not, they're not in a hurry.
No.
They'll wait till they're 100 years old and then they'll bottle them.
So yeah, needless to say, I've been bugging Richard for quite some time to do some Canadian single casks of old grain, and assuming there might be some good pricing there at some point, but
Hey,
I'll keep hammering away.
I'm down.
Yeah,
I'll maybe give him a little nudge at some point too.
yeah. Well, I think now too that the market isn't what it was. There might be a little bit more incentive to look for
Hmm.
maybe some alternate revenue streams, and maybe we can maybe even do like an alternate label or something.
And James, I mean, maybe this is an offline conversation for later. Maybe they let us create our own blend.
Yeah, right? Seriously.
Yeah. Um, it's lovely. It's creamy, it's thick. You can definitely see the age on it.
Yeah.
Um, Stuart's already declaring his Felicitas as his favorite. I'm a little torn. I mean, I like things at both the start and end of this. I mean,
Yeah.
I think if I were to pick a favorite, it would probably be the first and fourth. But I'm not sure which one yet. I like them for different reasons.
Yeah, I think I sometimes wish that the Muse was considered up there with the great like old Compass Box releases like Tobias and
Mhm.
luxury whiskey because I feel like it's like the blending mastery is obvious, but
Mhm.
again, we put it in a different category because it is a grain.
Mhm. Um, Before we move on, I want to just put this one on the screen and share it because I've had the chance to drink this, but this never even came to Canada. And we talked about the last vatted malt, or you briefly alluded to it, or no, it was the general.
Yeah.
But to me, like if Tobias and the Angel might be a close second to the general, but right up there in the pantheon of the best releases they did, I think was another one called Last Vatted Malt, which was a dig at the industry, which was changing the rules around what had previously been known as pure malts or vatted malts and forcing people to call them blended malts, all because Diageo was greedy and tried to trick people because Cardew was going crazy. They didn't want to lose sales of Cardew, but they also needed Cardew for Johnny Walker Red Label. So they blended malts together to create something that tastes like Cardew. They called it Cardew Pure Malt, and they caused a shitstorm. And the overcorrection to all this was that they banned the use of the term pure malt and vatted malt with Scotch whiskey, which previously just meant a blend of malt whiskeys, and you had to call it a blended malt moving on. When this happened, Compass Box did a release, The Last Vatted Malt, which was very heroic, kind of a sharp, pointy stick in the eye of the industry. And we had that here, but what we didn't have was the last vatted grain.
Oh, good luck with that one.
I had a chance to try it. We
Okay.
even
I was
poured
gonna
it
say
for
the
a
packaging
tasting.
is stunning.
Yeah, I mean, almost identical to the last vatted malt, except like a yellow label versus a cream label. Very heroic image, sort of a last stand for democracy. But yeah, I just wanted to share that before we move on to the
Mhm.
Extinct
They
Blends.
do come up at auction fairly frequently in the UK.
Yeah, and I'm sure they're not inexpensive because there was only
No, no, I think you're looking at about 800 Canadian dollars, I believe.
because they my recollection, and maybe I should have a closer look at that, was that they didn't release very many bottles, which was part of the problem. Like it
Yeah.
was my recollection was it was only like a couple of casks, so it was like $300 or $400 or total bottles worldwide.
Mhm. Yeah,
Hmm.
that doesn't help our cause.
Mm-mm. Anyway, lovely range of grains that we've gone through there to start off with. Will be interesting to see. Oh yeah, Evan's got 4 poll questions for us tonight, so we'll be interesting to see what poll questions he has for us. But James, is it time? Should we move on to the Extinct
Yeah.
Blends
Yeah, that
Quartet?
was a fun experiment. Happy to go through them side by side like that and
Yeah.
kind of re-archive in the brain the memories of what the differences between those ones are. So that's
Well,
fun.
what's interesting is in the last 5 to 10 years, well, in the last 2 or 3 years, grain whiskeys have become harder to come by and more expensive. But up until about 3 to 5 years ago, you could get quite easily 30, 40, almost 50-year-old grains quite regularly. And they've gone away. And I mean, for me, I used to love having tastings with them because it was just a chance to try something old. And those opportunities have become fewer and fewer over the last few years. So to go through 4 grains in a tasting is a bit of a novelty these days. I don't think I've done that in a very long time.
Yeah.
Pre-COVID, for sure, was the last time we did something like that.
Yeah, I've definitely seen some clubs out there do some even more comprehensive hedonism tastings where they've had last vatted grain, where they've had the quindecimus.
Oh, yeah.
Um, so yeah, people definitely collect them. There's
Yeah. Very cool. All
Yeah,
right.
if you're a Compass Box fanboy, it's definitely part of the conversation, that's for sure.
Well, it's probably one of the few I don't have in my collection. All right, James, Extinct Blends. I think what's interesting about this project is that this is from start to finish a James Saxon joint.
Yes.
And that's maybe one of the things we hinted at, but haven't really talked about. John Glazer left Compass Box earlier this year, but really James Saxon has been doing a lot of the heavy lifting for the blending over the last 5 to 6 years. And I think when this range came out, that was the first kind of not big projects, but prestige projects that he had his hands in. And the idea here was they wanted to recreate the profiles of great blends of the past that are not what they used to be. And James, you can probably fill in a few more details on that, but
For sure. Yeah. So,
oof,
I mean, I think we all, if we were trying to go and recreate, 4 whiskeys that we couldn't get anymore, it might not be this four. I'm gonna guess that one of these four would show up in almost everyone's list. But
mhm,
yeah, the first one we're doing tonight is the Delos, which has a direct tie. It's actually a recreation, in essence, of one of the original Compass Box whiskeys, which was a Sila.
mhm,
So yeah, Sila was something, I believe it was the second whiskey that John bottled.
yeah,
And the idea, it was kind of a precursor to the artist blend, really. It was a very simple blend of malt and grain whiskey that was low strength, had this kind of very drinkable character. John specifically loved drinking it in highballs, which is his favorite cocktail. But yeah, so what they couldn't get the ingredients for that anymore. I think the last batch of that came out around maybe 2015.
mhm,
But yeah, to recreate this, they really kind of went off the deep end. So the idea was to create something that was very drinkable. They wanted to turn up kind of that tropical fruit character. And why not go and find yourself some 25-year-old. I'll pull up the recipe here so people can see. 25-year-old Imperial
mhm.
and 23-year-old Milton Duff. So let's share this recipe here. Yeah, one of the things that actually surprised me with this release, I think the packaging being so humble relative to previous Compass Box releases, I think maybe took some people off guard a little bit
Mhm.
because the ingredients in all 4 of these are pretty wild, actually.
Mhm. Well, I mean, Asilo was a lovely blend, but what's interesting with this is that I think it's not even doing this whiskey justice to say that it's a recreation of Asila, because I mean, to use your phrase from earlier, this would be a Sila plus. Like this is older, more elegant,
Yeah,
and
I
with
mean
that
it's
imperial in there,
so
more
good.
decadent.
Yeah, I mean it obviously like very intense, lots of that fruit. Just to take an old parcel like this of Imperial and create a blend with this kind of very generic label. Like it's such a very Compass Box thing to do.
It is very, you know, you can pick up some of the other components towards the finish, but the start and the mid palate on this is really dominated by those imperial notes.
Yes.
It's quite
Yeah,
lovely.
and I think this whiskey says a lot about James's palate. I mean, all these whiskeys do. Um, when you look at this recipe, it kind of looks like a John Glaser recipe, truthfully.
Hmm.
But I definitely seem to notice James likes whiskeys that are a little bit more forward,
Hmm.
maybe a little bit, not quite as elegant, a little bit bolder in flavor.
Hmm.
But
Um,
I mean, it's tough to critique this one.
so if people don't know, no, this is, I mean, it's straight on beautiful. The nose on this it's kind of elegant and understated. Uh, I want to throw this quickly on the screen. So shortly after, he left Compass Box, I had dinner with John in London in June. And after dinner, we were walking away. He said, before we go our separate ways, come with me for a minute. We wandered into this park across the street, and he pulled out one of the original bottles of Asila from his bag. I mean, to the point about this, and this being something he was eminently proud of. I mean, this was one of the first releases he ever created. And as good as it was, and it was great, like this is a step above that for sure.
Yeah,
But that was like a classic John Glaser moment where
that's crazy.
you go to the park and have a final glass of something from his backpack. James, I think I shared that photo with you, but one of the things that I loved about it, because this wasn't the inception of that company and also the early days of the internet, on the back label it said, and this was a release of 1,600 bottles from March of 2011. It was bottled in Elgin, which raises questions about the baller.
Yeah, it
Um,
was definitely the early bottler of Compass
yeah,
Box was Gordon MacPhail, of course.
on the back label, the last paragraph says, for lots more information, please visit compassboxwhiskey.com or give me a call. You'll find the phone number on the website. And I believe that was his cell phone. So in those days, you could go onto the Compass Box website and call up John Glaser and ask him about his whiskeys personally.
Unbelievable.
Mm, love it.
Fun.
It it it's like Old Imperial with a little tweaking.
Yep. Yep. Yeah,
Gorgeous.
I never get tired of that one.
No, but I'm glad I have at least one of those in my cellar.
Yep. Yeah, the one of the challenges of this Extinct Blends Quartet is I think all of us that have followed Compass Box long enough,
Hmm.
we all kind of have this Mount Rushmore in our head of Compass Boxes.
Hmm.
And I feel like the Extinct Blends Quartet like really makes it difficult to make that list because I think truthfully some of these whiskeys belong in that
Yeah,
conversation. But I mean, we have a natural tendency as human beings to just automatically exalt the older, hard to get ones. But uh but yeah, it's fun that we at least get to try them all four back to back here.
absolutely. All right. What's up next, James? We've
It
got
is Ultramarine, which
Ooh.
was the idea here was to recreate the original Johnny Walker Blue Label.
Yeah. I'm that I should have, I think, on the site. Um, I mean, the name on that is awesome. I mean,
Yeah.
to put ultramarine is um yeah, definitely a little bit
Yeah, very
mischievous.
clever.
Here we go. Put that up there. So there was a time when I started when Johnny Walker Blue Label was still maybe not quite as much, but especially in the 90s, like it was considered one of the pinnacles of Scotch whiskey. Like that was one of the finest things that was out there. I could be wrong, but I seem to recall at one point the whiskeys in it were all either at or approaching 40 years of age. Like, and this is in the 90s, maybe the early 2000s. And what happened over the course of the 2000s is it just became commodified. I mean, and that process has never ended. You have it continuing with things like Johnny Walker Blue Label Ice Chalet and the Chinese Zodiac bottlings. which is an attempt to kind of maintain market share in an ever tighter market for products like that. But as kind of disappointing as Johnny Walker Blue Label is today, and we've done several tastings where it is truly just not exciting at all. Like it's not bad, but it's not worth the price or the hype anymore. This is harkening back to a much earlier age of this whiskey when it was something quite a bit more substantial and, quite frankly, better, a much better product.
I can share the recipe, Andrew, if you want.
Now that'd be great. I'll just take this down.
I think it's safe. Yeah, the recipe for this ultramarine is like such a mic drop for James's, establishing himself at Compass Box. Like if anyone thinks that you could go in a lab and recreate this, like this is just it's remarkable what's been done here. But it's not hard to imagine that the actual Johnny Walker Blue Label probably is fairly kaleidoscopic in the recipe.
Well, I seem to remember they used to claim that there was 100 different components,
Yeah.
100 different malts and grains that were blended into Johnny Walker Blue Label. At
Yeah,
one.
and it seems like it's been purposefully done here too, where there was an effort to really combine a lot of different things together.
This is one of the busiest, if not the busiest, Compass Box spider graph I think I've
Yeah,
ever.
I think it is. I think it absolutely is.
The company's ethos was always sort of um, there's an elegance and simplicity about not having things that were overly complicated. But this looks like this was not an easy task. This was a real stretch to kind of recreate this.
Yeah, I think this is a little bit more James's style too.
Hmm.
He's a little bit more Willy Wonka in his approach. Um, like even the Flaming Heart, same thing, right? Has a much more complicated recipe than previous editions.
Hmm. Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah, again, the balance though, tough to argue with the balance.
Hmm. Yeah, it really does have a nice balance to it, a nice elegance to it. Um,
Yeah, I should note, Andrew, the thing that I've really come across probably the most with Compass Box, as especially when I introduce new people to it, is I think there's a natural inclination that we all have that we kind of assume that somehow the single malt is kind of like the top cut of product in the warehouse, that is kind of like a showcase, and that there is somehow some sort of leftovers that get combed through for like independent bottlers and blenders.
mhm,
And it's like I noticed that's a common kind of conception that exists that needs to be overcome
mhm,
for people to really wrap their heads around Compass Box.
mhm.
And of course, I think most of us know probably the truth is kind of the opposite, that a lot of times it's independent bottlers skimming the good stuff, or at least maturing it more carefully.
Yeah, and they maybe have more of an eye for when there's
Yeah.
something unique because of their scale.
Yes. And there's more pressure on, if you're a large market single malt, there's a lot of pressure to take inferior casks and find a way to kind of hide them in the blend, right?
Mhm,
And if you're Compass Box, you can't get away with that.
mhm.
Like Compass Box has so much scrutiny.
Yeah.
The reading the whiskey based reviews for Compass Box releases is truly fascinating. The Tobias and Angel one has some great comments, because it kind of illustrates how people like do have a tough time wrapping their head around some of these ideas. You get a lot of comments like, "Oh, it's good, but it seems expensive for a blend," like stuff like that,
Yeah. It
which
it
you would imagine if you were at the point where you were trying to buy an Angel that you would kind of be past that. But
yeah. Well, I mean, looking at things like that, James, I mean, to your point, like that's someone who clearly doesn't understand what they're trying. Like,
yes,
I mean, you're trying essentially really old, was it Kleinlich and Kalila? Like those were the two
hmm,
components in it. And I mean, I know this isn't what he was trying to do, but I mean, essentially he recreated Brora. It
yeah,
was like making something that tastes like Brora. Um, I guess that's the equivalent of like someone doing some posting themselves doing something good or interesting on Instagram and then getting trolled. So if you've got enough people, there's always going to be somebody who's going to say something snarky about it. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, Compass Box definitely brings in its fair share of that
mhm,
type of critique. But yeah, a lot of Compass Box classes that I do, it's I've just learned that it's best to just kind of dig into like how a single malt is made first. In
mhm,
fact, that's how I start Compass Box classes now is I explain how like a mass market single malt is made and how the process works.
mhm.
And then we start tasting blends.
Makes sense.
Anyways.
Very cool. All right. Um, Metropolis, what's up next? Now, this one, James, was built around kind of a famous blend that you can't really, I think you can only get it at auction now.
Yeah, apparently it's not that hard to get. Um, because it was fairly widely available, I'm suspecting here
Hmm.
at one point. Yeah, this another kind of hallmark of Compass Box is sometimes John would get like way deep into the idea that there would be like some sort of 4D chess between the packaging and the caption and the ingredients and the story. And I think Metropolis is like the absolute pinnacle of that element of Compass Box. And I think this must be maybe one of the last releases that like has that kind of signature of John's kind of elusive,
Hmm.
kind of over the top introspective quality. So yeah, the whiskey was a blend that was based around Glenmorangie called Bailey Nickel Jarvie.
Hmm.
I don't know if the name's on here.
I'm not sure that it is because,
Yeah, I don't think they were allowed to release that. But yeah, the reason they went after this one is I think they felt some kinship with that blend because at the time, the marketing around Bailey Nickel was that they were using like one of their big hallmarks was that they were using a bigger malt content. And they
mm,
also apparently at the time shared information about the ingredients. So it was like it was well known that Glenmorangie was an ingredient at the time. So I think there's yeah, again, some affinity between Bailey Nichols' history and Compass Boxes. So that was kind of the thought process in recreating it. But
man, it was so juicy and decadent. Like
yeah,
creme brulee. Uh, there's also like a fattiness to it. It reminds me, this place Carino in Calgary will occasionally do these foie gras ice cream puff pastries. So like it's like basically a profiterole but with foie gras ice cream inside it, and this kind of reminds me of that sort of decadent experience.
yeah, yeah. What a great deal too this whiskey is for what you're getting in terms of
Mhm.
ingredients.
Yeah. Do you have your spider graph
Yeah,
draw?
I do have it, so I'll pull that one up. Um, yeah, another one where it would hurt your eyes to really get too deep into this. But yeah, you can see this 30-year-old Aberlour
Hmm.
and then a blended malt parcel, which I believe this might be the same malt parcel maybe that went into your first Kensington blend, perhaps.
Mm.
I don't know if John told you anything about that.
I My understanding is that they truly didn't know what it was because there was no records.
Right.
Um, but I mean,
Yeah, these blended parcels are things that they got that John bought from Gordon and MacPhail back in
like,
the days when he was using their blended facility when they were young and he just
mhm.
aged them.
I
Yeah.
mean, who knows what they could be?
Yeah,
Because
of
Gordon MacPhail had some of their own blends back in the day too that they used to release.
course. Yeah, Glenn Calder
Hmm.
was kind of their house. So yeah, I mean it's not a long shot to think that we might see Glenn Calder show
Hmm.
up in the market again.
Don't tell David King.
I think there's a lot of Calders and McCalders scattered across Alberta.
Oh,
I don't know if you know any, but I know a few.
but I'm sure I've come across the name once or twice.
Yeah.
I mean, what's interesting to me about these is I think of the ones we've had so far, the Delos was just kind of lush and elegant and waxy and going tropical. And now we have this much richer, I'm almost afraid to use the word meaty, but it's
Yeah.
moving into that sort of thicker, heavier, maltier profile. But still loads of layers and complexity to it.
Yeah, it's interesting that that kind of like almost like, that charred meat kind of character. Um
Hmm.
I don't associate that with Aberlour, but maybe with Milton Duff occasionally, but certainly not Bowmore either.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, nice range. Um, Anything else we want to add about Metropolis before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, if anyone does want to get into the packaging in the story, this is the one you should go and read about because yeah, there's like the packaging is an homage to like Scottish literature and characters within Scottish literature, and there's just all sorts of layers upon layers.
Well, and doesn't that have a lot to do with the fact that James, was he a poet in
Oh yeah.
university?
Yeah, that's his history.
Yeah. So,
So yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and of course Bailey Nickel was a character in Rob Roy.
there you go.
So yeah. All right.
Yeah. I guess James, we need brands that speak to North American culture. So,
Well,
references to things like The Sopranos or,
I
well,
mean, you could argue
that's fair. Kiss. Yeah.
because that although I guess maybe you could argue on the other side that, that type of heavy metal kind of exists in Britain to a certain extent, or at least that culture.
Hmm. Yeah. All right. Celestial, the final of the Extinct Blends. And one of the few that's actually uh, still kicking around to a certain extent.
Yeah,
Uh,
as is its inspiration, which is White Horse, which I believe you can still buy White Horse in the
Now,
UK.
James, I'm just noticing I'm sold out of this, but is that something I can still get? I haven't even looked recently.
I think it may be gone.
Maybe gone.
Yeah.
Shame. Now,
You might
I
have a
don't,
case still in your allocation, perhaps.
I don't think so. I'm pretty sure I would have pulled it unless there was one put there charitably by someone. Um,
Yeah.
I
I'll
kind of,
do some digging while I'm on the call here if you
all
can
right.
carry on.
Well, I was just gonna say this one is almost a little bit triggering to me because I don't know, for some reason brings me back to Sunday school. The label on this, like there's something
Yeah, it looks like the
kind
cover
of,
of a Bible.
it's a little biblical. And not in the warm and feely way, but in the way that reminds you that we all die, which I suppose is true, but not something we choose to confront all the time. But yeah, final release in the Extinct Blends Quartet. It's Ardbeg and Kalila are two big components in it. There's also some whiskey from Pulteney Distillery, which you'll note you can't call Old Pulteney because that is a brand and not the name of the distillery. And then some whiskey as well from Port Dundas and Cameron Bridge. And this is, James, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this is based on Whitehorse.
That is correct.
Old
Which,
Botlington Whitehorse.
yeah, White Horse, which back in the day, of course, was made with Lagavulin, I believe,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
That was the main outlet of Lagavulin malt. So their goal here was to create something that tasted a bit like older Lagavulins.
Oh man.
So
Whether they've achieved that or not, I
I
think at
know
the
it's
end of the
irrelevant,
day,
isn't it?
it's irrelevant because it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that nice balance of the Ardbeg, the Kalila, that, I'm not sure it's even fair to say that we could get a maritime Pulteney character out of this because
Yeah.
Ardbeg and Kalila have got a maritime quality of their own, but wow.
Andrew, I can get you 6 more bottles of this.
Yes, please. The The other thing about this is of all the four blends, this is the one where I think it would be hardest to pick out that it is a blend as opposed to, say, a
Agreed.
blended malt.
Yeah, that richness of the peated malt is just like it's pretty powerful.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
when you went through the ingredients, basically this is kind of a sequel to No Name Number One in a lot of ways, and it does drink that way, doesn't it?
Mhm. Well, and I mean, I
Like
think we
it's a bit
know that
chewy.
it's that same parcel of casks that was used for No Name Number One
Yeah.
of Ardbeg, also used for the Kensington Wine Market 30th anniversary release, not the
Yeah.
25th. So, hmm,
Hmm.
damn. Old Isla softened with a little bit of grain and a bit of Pulteney.
Yep. Yeah, it's very clever. Yeah, I find that again, trying to pick a favorite of these is a really interesting challenge because much like all Compass Box, they are not really all in the same category.
No, no. Well, James, on that note, and in an effort to pick favorites, I think it's time to do a speed round. Maybe we won't go quite as fast as normal, but try to use this as an opportunity to pick favorites. So going all the way back to that first hedonism, man, it is now it's just like vanilla icing sugar. It is
Oh wow.
decadent and creamy on the nose and floral.
Yeah, hedonisms are notorious for being kind to sitting in the glass.
Mhm. And raspberries, like a bucket of like freshly picked raspberries.
Yeah, that acetone alcohol gets so much softer after it sits
Mhm.
too.
It's still there, like you can still tell this is grain whiskey, but
Sure.
yeah, time has been kind to that in the glass. All right, where are we at? Uh, what is this?
2024.
2024. I note that the text on the labels we sent people on these bottles is quite busy and long, and you have to turn the bottles to read them. So that's why I'm struggling here to remember which ones we've got in
Yeah.
front of us. It's very pleasant. I think it shows really well.
It
It
doesn't have the elegance though, does it?
no, it's like an off region or off brand limoncello versus the real deal. It's
Yeah.
just it's not the same.
Yeah, like it clings on your mouth in a way that I don't love.
Mhm. So nay bad, but not the
Again, I
best.
think that was kind of the goal here was to create a hedonism but with oomph. So, yeah, whether they achieve that or not is
Mhm. Felicitas has held up nicely.
yeah. Although its advantage aromatically that it had on the first pass, I don't think it necessarily can say anymore. Like I feel like the fruitiness is actually faded.
Still there to a certain extent on the palate, but it's like very woody now.
Hmm.
Very drying, very oaky, very spicy.
Yeah, it
Still.
has a very distinct grain whiskey flavor.
Mhm. Okay. Muse.
Oh man, Muse has taken on all sorts of new nooks and crannies. Some really
All
interesting, almost like malted chocolate, um, like a little bit of almost like cheap Halloween candy chocolate kind of character.
So we've got two notes, one of which will riff on yours. The mint filled arrow bars,
Yeah, I love
which
it.
but from the freezer. Like you
Yeah,
And
Yeah.
the other is like eucalyptus, like going into a eucalyptus sauna. Like it's just kind of
Mhm.
almost overpowering, but there's
It
still
really does have this like lifted, refreshing quality on the palate.
Mhm.
Like the strength is just right. It doesn't burn.
Well, I have two favorites picked out, but again, they're the bookends that we started with
Yeah.
um in that series.
Yeah,
Uh
I would agree.
I mean, and how I mean, James, and I'm not I'm bringing this up because I find it's interesting to me. But like how kind of uh reassuring is that to know that like the standard release amongst you know put up against three limited editions of riffs on that theme holds up that well against them. That
Yeah, I mean, it tells you exactly why it stuck around for all those years and why they kept going back to it is because, like, even if we started getting into a shootout here with grains or blended grains or single cast grains from other, like, I think Muse would still, or the original Hedonism would still walk on a lot of other pretenders.
right. So I'm not going to show it, but I was sent this sample pack of blends from another company that wants to get into the market, and they wanted to roll out a blended grain, a peated blended malt, a space side blended malt. And my feedback on them, on all of them, was that A, your prices are higher than Compass Box and your quality isn't the same. Like your whiskeys are fine. I think for me, what this goes back to is things like even Story of the Spaniard, which was not my favorite whiskey in their range. There was a consistent level of quality there that was always very high. And they never sacrificed like the quality of the whiskey for consistency, which I
Yeah.
think is one of the things that separates it from most other blenders.
Yeah, that's very fair.
Uh,
Yeah, I mean, they've definitely released things that I couldn't get into. I didn't love either of the circles. I didn't love Canvas.
you didn't like the one that tasted like coral or the color coral? I
Yeah,
mean,
I don't have that same synesthesia.
no, neither do I. I actually didn't mind the first circle. I thought it was interesting. Like, I liked the profile of it, but to the same point, James, I mean, there's different people like different things, and I think that speaks to
Yeah.
uh,
Well, I mean, the whole premise of that whiskey was that it was a bottle that was designed to like that you would bring to the beach and crack it open and like drink it under a sun umbrella.
mhm.
Well, I don't do that very often, so
No, and
I'm not the demographic.
if you did, you'd probably want to do it with a tumbler of hedonism and a big block ice cube.
Mhm. Yeah, right. That would be the way to do it. Yeah, I could be convinced.
All
By the way,
right.
Andrew, if you were to drink a cocktail with hedonism, for me, it probably would be highball, but where would you go with it?
I mean, that's tough because you don't want to overpower it. I mean, I think it would make an interesting penicillin if you were going to go that kind of direction. Like the spice in it might hold up. That's tough. Most of the cocktails I really like involve like red vermouth,
Yeah,
which
sure. Yeah,
is
Rob Roy.
probably not going to do it any favors.
I feel like you need to make at least one Rob Roy out of Metropolis,
You know what? That James, the challenge is accepted. We're gonna make
right?
that happen.
Because I don't doubt that that was in their mind when they made this. I mean, you can't have like a whiskey named after a Rob Roy character and not make a Rob Roy with it.
That's some Vegas level, ingredients. You need some kind of gold plated something in the liquid to justify the price, probably. Uh,
Okay.
but no, that's an interesting thought. We should try that at some point in time. Lord knows I've got enough open bottles here that I can start getting creative. Uh, Delos, back to speed rounds.
Yeah, this has just added all sorts of other new fruit.
Mhm.
What a joy. Just pure joy in a glass.
That's going to be tough to beat.
Now this would be the beach whiskey, right?
I don't know. It might be too much for me.
Yeah. But if the ice cube brought it down to like 40%.
I'd be afraid of how that would happen. But again, could always try, see what happens. Yeah, that is lush. It's waxy, floral, fruity. There's a lot going on there, a lot to love.
Mhm.
Um, it is my early favorite in the back end of this tasting, but we'll see where we go. How's the ultramarine fared?
Yeah, it's really picked up. I wouldn't associate this. I know the peat comes from Kalila in this, but like I think I would guess like it reminds me a bit of Ardmore.
It's funny. I was just about to say that. The second you said when you said it's like Kalila, but I know it's going to go a different direction. I thought Ardmore.
Yeah, doesn't it? So like Gordon MacPhail has that 27-year-old Ardmore that we
Hmm.
have in Alberta, and it has a lot of similarities with this whiskey.
The distillery label one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's a little bit barnyardy,
Hmm.
like a little bit like a horsey stable.
Yeah, it makes you wonder like where does that come from?
I don't know, but that's
Yeah,
why
like you look at the
Ardmore.
ingredients list and there's not an obvious. Yeah, it's very interesting.
It's tasty. I like that better the second time around than the first,
I agree. Yeah,
but
time has been very kind.
still no Delos.
No.
Okay, Metropolis. The nose on this is really kind of opened up.
Yeah, boy, the Bowmore is so cleverly blended here. You might remember that No Name 3 that used this same parcel of Bowmore, but in No Name 3 you could like the Bowmore like stuck out and they kind of did that on purpose if you remember. Like it was like you could taste the Bowmore and then you could taste I can't even remember what the other component now was off the top of my head. But here like the Bowmore is just like it's just lovely. It just gives you that little kind of twist.
There's I guess some of you on the island are experiencing uh interesting times. Lights have been dimming. I guess you got that bomb cyclone hitting you. But yeah, James, the Bowmore element in this is really cool. Um, it's an interesting whiskey to think about blending with because it is so distinct. Um, in some ways, you might think it might almost be hard to work with from the standpoint of a blender.
Yeah. Man, the richness on the palate of Metropolis.
Hmm.
It's like Metropolis has a richness like on the back of the palate that the Delos has on the front,
Yeah,
but it's like a totally different spectrum. It's more like dark fruit, licorice.
it's more old school for sure.
Yeah.
I think of the four is probably the most old school tasting of the blends. All right, Celestial, the Anchor Dram. Nose has been kind to that one too.
Mhm.
Hmm. Or I should say
It's just
time.
lovely. Absolutely lovely.
I mean, and how much of that one was Kalila again? Pretty good
I don't
chunk.
think a lot.
Really?
I don't think a lot.
Because I mean, it almost, yeah, Ardbeg Kalila. It almost tastes just, it just reminds me of like really good old Kalila.
It's 11% Kalila.
And yet that is what it tastes like the most of anything.
I know. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Mm,
So yeah, the Ardbeg is I think 19 years old, and then the Pulteney and Kalila are 22 years old.
wow.
Do you know anything about 22-year-old Kalilas?
I believe there's one coming.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some cool stuff on the water. All of it, I believe, 2025. Is that fair to say?
Yeah,
Not
I
all.
think so.
I mean, there's some stuff coming sooner, but I mean, you're alluding to we've got a Kensington cask of Kalila coming that's a little bit on the older side. We have two Ben Romics coming, one from 2002 and one from 2005 that's sherried. Um, yeah, there's some fun stuff in the pipeline for next year, but there's also some cool stuff landing in the next week or two from G&M. Uh, James, I'm gonna
Yeah.
fire up the poll
And from
here.
Compass Box for that matter.
Oh, that's right. We've got we've got Nectarosity, and what's the other one again?
The Crimson Casks, which
Right.
yeah, essentially if anyone has questions, I mean, now's probably the time to just slot that in. They're I think they're designed to kind of slot in more with Orchard House and Peat Monster. Nectarosity is a little bit inspired by Oak Cross. It's there's a big picture of cake on the front. So you can imagine it's a little bit more wood forward. There's a lot of sweetness, a lot of vanilla. Um, and then Crimson Casks is, Compass Box released the Spaniard, which had some like refill sherry and Spanish red wine. They've gone much more in depth on that, and Crimson Casks is kind of their first take at a sherry bomb.
Mhm. Which, I mean, funny enough, back in the day, that was something that I think John was anti-sherry cask for the longest time.
Yes. Yeah,
Partly
apparently
because,
he fought back. They wanted to make Spaniard more sherry dominant, and he wouldn't let them. Is how I believe that went.
but I mean, what's interesting though is if you look at two of the most famous whiskeys that he's released, which would be like the General and Last Fatted Malt,
Yeah,
they
they're from sherry.
they're sure they were such a departure from everything he did before.
Yeah.
Uh, I had a chance to try both of these at their studios in London or Greater London, technically Richmond. Um, in fact, if you're a Ted Lasso fan, the famous park bench and like street scene is like about a block and a half away from their offices. But yeah, they're cool releases. They're coming, expected probably in the next week or two, just down the line. Uh, and I guess James, maybe not everyone in this chat knows, but things like the story of the Spaniard, uh, like
And the
Spice
Spice
Tree,
Tree. Yeah, they're being
they're
retired.
they're they're all going away.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, one of the lessons for Compass Box is that, if you kind of base your business around churning special releases, it's tough to expand who you're pouring to. And I think they learned when they released Orchard House and it was such a hit that it made sense for them to have something that's more of like a little bit more commercial in nature.
mhm.
And yeah, there'll still be special releases. A lot of you've seen probably Secrets of Smoke, which I'm sure will be very popular in Alberta. And I'll
Mhm.
certainly get, as much of that as I can get my hands on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One, James has already started the conversation. Do you want to do a 35th anniversary release? So it's on the agenda for Compass Box, which is cool because I
Yeah.
wasn't sure that they'd even be considering it.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
I think it's one of the things, Andrew, that I've noticed internally for them is that they get a lot of requests for bespokes,
mhm,
and they kind of like that they have this tagline that we only do it for like existing clients and we're
mhm,
phasing it out. So I think
right,
by doing it for La Maison and doing it for you and like, Bounty Hunter and a few others,
mhm.
it allows them to like shut that conversation down.
Which is incredible to be put in the same conversation as La Maison de Whiskey, which is basically Europe. So
Yeah.
that's pretty cool. All right, we've got a poll to do here. We should fire that up. There's some secret questions in there too. And Evan has included an image for what I believe is the first time. So your first question, you can pick your favorite grain whiskey, then you can pick your favorite extinct blend, and then there's some cheeky questions. Best way to pronounce hedonism, and which possibly made up or Latinish sounding word should Compass Box use for a bottle name next? Cromulence. Cromulence. Cromulence is actually a real word. Uh, Flabbergast, historic,
Oh man.
histrionic, orth, octothorpe, flock. Oh my God, I can't even say that. That looks like it's Scandinavian and there's so many letters in it. Um,
Truculence.
yeah. But cromulent is actually a real word. I know that because of The Simpsons. but we don't need to go down that rabbit hole too far. So James, while people are voting, maybe we'll do 2 and 2. What are your two favorite hedonisms from this lineup tonight?
Yeah, the it would be the bookends. It would be the Muse #2 and the original #1.
Yeah. I'm gonna only reverse those because I want to appear to be slightly different, but the Muse and the original hedonism are for sure the standouts in that range, which is not to say the others aren't great. It's just I think that's incredibly cool that the basic, the everyday version of the whiskey is that good that it holds up to the others.
Yeah.
So same question, 2 favorites from the Extinct Blends.
Yeah. #2 would be Metropolis. I thought it showed I haven't yeah, it showed really well in the lineup tonight. But to me, Delos is like on a whole nother tier. To me, Delos is like right up there with the great all-time compass boxes. So, um, yeah,
I,
I mean that's the thing. Like people freak out about things like General. Like Delos sit on the shelf, and I think it's right there.
I agree. I think the Delos is heads and shoulders the best of the 4 blends. Metropolis is a close second, and Celestial shows really well. Um, I mean, the Ultramarine for me, I think, is the weakest of the 4, but it's still a great whiskey.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so,
Especially the prices of these were all just so fair
mhm,
relative to the components and everything else.
yeah. I
Oh,
suppose, James, the caveat to that would be as long as you appreciate what they are and what they're trying to do there, because
yeah,
again,
right.
you're
I
just
know.
setting yourself up for some trolling. They're blends,
Well, you
James.
almost have to go through a tasting like this to like really appreciate them, which,
Right.
you know, maybe that's a good thing, but maybe it's not.
Mhm. So 3 of you, I'll note, have not voted. You have approximately 1 minute to place your votes so that we can count them and have some accurate data here. For those of you on the West Coast, hopefully the next few hours go well and the storm is not too severe. Um, I suppose that means we'll get snow in the mountains, which is no bad thing. James, any other things you want to add before we start winding this thing down?
Um, yeah, not really. I mean, I think we touched on the new compass boxes that are coming,
Mhm.
which is exciting. And yeah. I mean, basically the next 3 queued up releases I think are all things that I'm excited about, which it's been a while since that's been the case with Compass Box. So,
Fair.
but
All right.
yeah, don't sleep on this Extinct Blends Quartet because I think a lot of people viewed it as like the new myths and legends, but I couldn't disagree more.
And I mean, the sad thing is the myths and legends
They were
weren't
underwhelming.
they were underwhelming, but they were still pretty good. But yeah, these are very, very different from
Yeah,
that.
these are a tier above that.
All right, the results. So for
Wow.
favorite grain, uh, look, the bookends have it. It's a tie. It's a dead tie between Hedonism 43% and the Muse, with Felicitas getting some votes. And then for the blends, Delos. James, you and I were outvoted. It's Delos Celestial, Metropolis Ultramarine. Um, so interesting to see. And then the best way to pronounce hedonism. Uh, I suppose this is a little bit like how do you pronounce Calgary? If
Yeah.
you have the emphasis on Gary, you're wrong. It's Calgary. Yeah. Just for those who don't know. And then which probably made up word. Um, the one that's based on flocculation, but looks like it was written in Viking runes, was the interesting winner there. And cromulence, um, which might not be a word, Tom Rand, but it's based on a real word, which is cromulent. It is a perfectly cromulent answer to that question. There's some historical baggage on that word. You should look it up. It's actually quite fascinating. Well, listen, James, uh, thank you very much for this. We've had a number of these. We might see you out this way next week, a little later on next week. You're coming
True,
out
true.
you're going to be in Banff. For anyone who on this chat might be at the Banff Whiskey Experience.
Yep. I
Yeah,
will be there.
he will be there. I won't. I probably should be, but I won't be there. But we have a great tasting in store next week with not Richard, but Stephen Rankin from Gordon MacPhail coming to KWM. So that's exciting. Well, James, thanks for this. Thanks for all the context, and thank you to you and Authentic. This tasting wouldn't have been possible without you. Kensington set aside some of these bottles and held them back, but James also did the same. And without that kind of forethought, these kind of things wouldn't happen because we wouldn't have 4 hedonisms to work with or 4 extinct blends to work with. So thank you for that.
Yep. That was fun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, James, have a good night. Everyone else, have a good night. Hope you enjoyed tonight's tasting. And again, for those in BC, hopefully you wake up tomorrow and you're able to get to work and life carries on. So till then.
Good night.